very much for coming this evening. It's great to see so many people for our very first event. Yeah, it's been a fun week setting it all up. I'm Patrick McCrae, the director and co-founder of Works in Print, and tonight's about thanking everybody who's helped us get here. About 2 years ago, Works in Print didn't exist, and it's also to showcase 6 of our newest artists and to tell you a little bit about what we do. So, at its core, Works in Print's vision is to improve the workspace through the sale and rental of art. Basically, we provide artists as well with profitable exposure to an unprecedented paid-for exhibition. We always like to do it very well. That's the idea. So 2 years ago, in November 2009, my father and I founded Works in Print. We started trading in February 2010. We only had about 300 pieces of art then. By focusing on area-specific art, providing pieces relevant to the office and businesses, and so relevant to people's offices and their business surroundings, listening deeply to clients and producing pieces relevant to them, we quickly picked up 2 of the world's largest accountancy firms, Deloitte and Ernst & Young, NEPC, the Science Park owners, a string of high-end lawyers, fund managers, traders, and a few recruiters as well, who'd like to tuck up their offices. And over the last year, we've had double-digit growth, expanding firstly into large format pieces like the one on the manifestation next door, and these sort of things here, and then into original art, which is obviously why we're all here today. We now work with 25 artists, have about 3,000 pieces of art in stock, and are actively looking for more. So why art works? Well, when visiting client offices, it is evident that people love the whole process of the choosing of the art. And this is especially true for our rental clients, where we change the art every 6 months as standard. Offices form art committees, making the swapping of the art a biannual event. Sometimes clients even theme their artwork, so either around seasons, office locations, or ethos. We've got one client on a nautical theme at the moment, so they have pictures of boats on their walls and bits of rigging and rope on the desks. The main point is that when you do work in the back office, there seems to be a change for the better. People enjoy it. They're like, oh, that's my piece, I chose that, or oh, brilliant, the naked ladies went up, or whatever. We even had one woman say, oh, I got married in that church. So we had some area-specific pieces, and it was a church of where she got married. We even sometimes get positive feedback from people we've not even met. They have a certain ownership of their space, having chosen what's gone in. So, since earlier this year, Jenny and I have been working together to forward the notion that art works. And tonight we're going to show you that it does. So Dr. Jenny Thomas, our keynote speaker this evening, has her academic background in psychology and the built environment. She has worked with architects, national advisory organisations, and contributed significantly to BCO publications. She is now Director of Performance Consultancy, where she specialises in evidence-based design, evaluating the impact of workplace environments. So, without further ado, I give you Dr. Jenny Thomas.
Someone's almost getting clapped before you speak, so I hope what I'm going to present to you tonight is a little bit of research from my PhD. It was a research project of real-world workplaces as opposed to laboratory settings. So it's some examples of workplaces in action, and one of the aspects that was considered was the artwork. And what's particularly important to mention at this point is it was the staff that we were surveying in terms of the impact that the workplace had on them within the organisation, as opposed to the client perspective of people coming in, which I think realistically is where the majority of artwork tends to be focused, is on people visiting the organisation as opposed to people who actually work there. Just a little bit to kick off really about why it might be important, why it might have an impact on the key things that matter to an organisation, ultimately productivity. Well-designed workplaces there can increase productivity by up to 3%. That was the overall finding from my research. It's probably important to note that none of the workplaces that I researched have been designed specifically with the aim of increasing productivity through the environmental design. So this is purely workplaces. The ones that were better were having up to a 3% increase in productivity, which although it doesn't sound very much, that's just the workplace environment, so it's actually quite significant. Other research has found it can be around 5%, 3 to 5% is about the right amount that you can look at. It can go up to 15% in some research, but that tends to be when they do more extreme things to the workplace, like turn the temperature really high or turn all the lights off. That's when you tend to get really high differences. But your average workplace, 3 to 5% is not an unreasonable amount to think that the impact that the workplace can have. there are very specific aspects of the workplace that people know will have an impact. So I mentioned there temperature and light. You know that if it's very dark and people can't see what they're doing, that's going to affect how productive they are. And these things have a generally fairly direct impact on productivity. What people quite often don't think about are those things that are a bit less tangible, so the more sort of elusive, potentially subjective aspects of the workplace. And although these might not affect productivity directly, they can have quite significant impacts through indirect things such as satisfaction, how motivated people feel, how alert they are, what sort of mood they're in, all things which have been significantly linked in an awful lot of research to productivity. So it's very, very important to consider these intrinsic things as well as the intangibles, as well as the more specific things. One of these aspects that came out from my research of the less tangible was the artwork and aesthetics generally in the workplace. This tends to be an area where people don't focus their attention. So the workplaces that I surveyed, and I'll tell you a bit more about them in a minute, in 70% of the workplaces surveyed there was no artwork at all in the main office area or the back office. There tended to be stuff in the reception, maybe in the meeting rooms, but in the back office itself there wasn't any artwork. And even where there was artwork, 95% of people that were surveyed in the research, and that's around 400, 500 people, they couldn't see any artwork at all from their workstation. So even if it had been put in the back office, a lot of people couldn't actually see it. So it's not something that a lot of people consider. Operators in buildings don't necessarily consider it, even users themselves don't consider it. But actually, as you'll see from the research, it does seem to have a positive or negative difference to people, depending on if it's there or not. So the research itself, it was carried out in 16 newly refurbished offices, so they're all 1 to 5 years old in terms of refurbishment. There were a complete diverse range of different organisations, from legal firms, financial firms, telecoms company, manufacturers, some have laboratories in them as well, so a complete range of different types of workplaces. The average number of employees is 1,000, but actually they ranged from 15 people to over 6,000 employees. So again, a vast range of different types of size of organisation as well. The methodology, as I said, was very much about staff. So we were surveying people who were from administrative staff, senior managers, professionals, technical staff in these buildings that have laboratories. So it was everybody in the workplace, or a sample of, as opposed to just talking to a facilities manager or a senior management team member. And as I mentioned, art wasn't particularly high in terms of the priorities in these workplaces, and it certainly hadn't been considered, and actually came out probably as one of the least satisfactory aspects of the workplace that we surveyed. And there it is, demonstrated on the graph. This graph is purely what we class as interior design aspects, so there was a lot of other things measured, like temperature, light, spatial layout. On the graph, the closer the yellow line is to the outside, the more satisfied people were. That blue line is the minimum level of satisfaction, so anything inside that is negative. So you can see from this, things like the furniture tends to be fairly satisfactory, and that was replicated with the internal climate and the spatial layout. There's quite a lot of research into those areas. A lot of organisations consider them because they know the impact that they're going to have, and the standards that have been developed. So for the furniture, there's a lot of ergonomic standards that are developed in terms of office furniture manufacture, and if people follow them, occupants tend to be satisfied. The aspects of which have received less research attention and are considered to be less tangible and measurable tend to come out fairly negatively in most workplaces. So this is an average taken from all 16, but actually it's a fairly similar pattern in most workplaces, unless they'd invested in those elements. And there's actually a very strong correlation between the amount of artwork that there is in the workplace and how happy people are with it. So the fact that it's not being incorporated at all means as soon as someone's got some artwork in, people are happy. But actually, if it's the right artwork and it's done in the right way, it can start having even more positive impact on people. What Patrick and I have done is just put in a few example case studies that Works in Print have done, just to illustrate some of the points that I've been through, and then also to lead us on to the final results of the research that's carried out. Deloitte Financial Services Organisation actually held a competition to have their meeting rooms named in their Cambridge office. And once the meeting rooms had been selected and the winner had been announced, they then selected imagery with Works in Print and installed it to reflect the meeting room names. And actually, in terms of the impact of this artwork, very, very positive, because not only has we got it within the workplace, not just in the reception area, there's also that sense of ownership that people in the organisation have, because they've been involved in the choice of the names and therefore the associated imagery. So you get that sense of ownership, the buy-in, people feeling like it's their place of work, as well as the positive impact of having the artwork incorporated as well. Next one is Wealth Managers Benny. This was a project where their brief was to reflect the eminent position of the organisation in London, and particularly their location geographically. Again, it was thinking about the organisation and what they wanted, what people within that organisation identified with in that company. So it was actually a bespoke piece of work that was developed for them, and it became an integral part of the workplace. So that artwork suddenly became such an important part to them of the workplace, as opposed to just an add-on or an additional thought, and is really tied into the whole design of the workplace. And the last one we'll include is Square One. And actually this really reflects the importance of integrating art throughout the workplace. And this was done not just in meeting rooms, but as you can see at the bottom there, right the way through the office. And was tied in with the organisation's aims and interests in having inspiring figures to sort of generate the brand of the company. And those images were selected with the company, and they have said that they will change them on a regular basis, which is another important factor that I'll come on to at the end, is ensuring that you keep thinking about changing it, because as attractive as something might be, if someone has to look at that for 8 hours every day, all day, they will get bored of it after a few months, a year, a couple of years. If it's there for 8 years, they're not going to look at it anymore. Okay, and DCF, the last one. The scenes here, and I don't know if you can actually see them from where you are, but in terms of the imagery here, there's a lot of nature images that were included, and that was something that's come out of the research, not just the research I've done, but the research of others, as being a particularly important element of artwork, because it has quite a positive impact on attention restoration. So if you put it in something like a meeting room, people have discussions, actually they glance over and they see a piece of artwork. If it's something that will just take their attention away momentarily, refresh them almost mentally, come back into the conversation, and have actually quite a positive impact. That's just demonstrating the different types of art and the impact that they can have. So in terms of supporting research, so it's not just my research that's looked at this, there is a lack of empirical research into the impact of artwork in the workplace, I'll be honest. There is some in around healthcare buildings and various other buildings, but in terms of the workplace, as I say, it tends to be an element that's been largely ignored. But if you look at other research that's been done by different psychologists throughout the years into elements of a workplace that might link into artwork, there's quite a compelling argument to include it. The first one is 1890 reference, so it's one of the earliest psychologists, William James, and his research showed the need to actually restore your attention regularly. There's only a finite amount of time you can concentrate on something, which we all know. But it's very important to have elements within your environment that can actually detract your attention momentarily, refresh your brain, make you think about something else, that you can then concentrate more effectively when you go back to it. And there's a real potential for artwork to do that, as I showed you in the last case study. There are actually images and scenes which can aid attention restoration, so you might want to think about those in some areas where people might want to go and do calming, like particularly high concentration work, where they have to concentrate really hard, or in break areas if people want to take a break from the workstation. So scenes of nature actually tend to be the ones that come out best, as mentioned earlier. And that's all to do with people feeling that they're able to get away, or kind of the depth of the imagery that's there. But it's also thinking about colours as well, and things you might want to incorporate in your artwork. It's what you want that artwork to do for people in that space that's going to make the difference. There's quite an interesting piece of research by Stone, which is about an image. It wasn't a particularly nice image, so I'll concentrate on what it was of. It was a poster from the 1960s nature scene. But it was all about the impact on productivity, and it depended very much on what the person was doing and what the rest of the room was like. So if the rest of the room was very stimulating, they painted some of the walls red, having a poster actually helped, because that was something that would have a calming effect on people and help them restore in terms of their stimulation levels. If it was a more neutral room, sort of very pale colours, and they put a poster in, it would have the opposite effect. So it would actually detract people, which in some cases you might want in the workplace. You might want people to sort of think, if it's a particularly lively area where you might have discussions, you do want things that will inspire people to think about. And the last one as well that links into it is around the impact of colour. And this is a fairly simple piece of research. in the workplace environment which show that brighter colours in the workplace through artwork or general colour of the walls had a really positive impact on mood. And the more colours they found in the workplace, the more positive people's moods tend to be. I wouldn't necessarily assume that means you can just throw all sorts of colours at the workplace and it'll be fine. It's more to do with the fact that most workplaces are very, very neutral. So the ones where they start to incorporate colour in were actually having a really positive impact on mood. I suspect there is a cut-off point where it might get a little bit too much, but they didn't manage to find that in their research, which I think just highlights the point that it's an area that's really neglected. And so this is the last one really about the results. So you saw the impact in terms of the negative perception of artwork. So we actually did towards the end of the research was a small pilot study to assess what would happen if artwork was then incorporated into a workplace. So sort of an experimental design rather than just observation. It was done in the sense the idea of it was to increase people's level of alertness in that sort of post-lunch dip there from getting when your concentration levels start to fall off. It's not got anything to do with what you eat, because actually if you don't eat, it's worse apparently. So it is more to the time of day, there's a lot of psychological factors, and people's attention levels do tend to drop off, and that's perceived attention as well, so people feel that their attention levels are dipping. So what we did was we introduced a series of changes into the workplace to see what impact it was going to have. One of them was artwork, but there was also colour schemes, so we washed the walls with colour, temperature changes, air movement changes, giving people access to different breakout spaces in the afternoons. And actually artwork had the most significant impact. It had the greatest impact on stopping those attention levels from dropping as far. Didn't take them beyond the morning ones, but it stopped that dip from dipping quite as much by including artwork. And we included a different image every day, and that actually prompted things like improved social interaction, because people talked about what was there, what they might like to see going up. There were discussions around what the image was of, whether they liked it or not. The fact that you're changing it on a regular basis, if people don't like it, it's a reaction they have, but they might, the next piece that comes in can have a positive impact. And it was that talking point, and it did have the greatest impact on satisfaction as well. So people liked the introduction of the artwork, and they requested it to be continued to be incorporated in the long term. So realistically, from the research, I think we can say that art does clearly have some impact. It's statistically significantly correlated with satisfaction, which in turn is related very closely to productivity. But it is an area which is not considered very much, and seems to be an area which needs more consideration.
Thank you very much, DJ. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask?
In your first slide, you said well-designed workplace increase productivity. What was your definition of a well-designed workplace?
It's very, very complicated. When we said well-designed, it's not specific. You can't say if you have one red wall, it works. It completely depends on the organisation, the people that are in there. So well-designed in the definition of this was that it was having a positive impact on satisfaction and essentially then productivity. So it wasn't the design specifically, it was the impact that it was having.
So if the design impact productivity in a positive way, then therefore.
Yeah, in that sense.
And the second question, you talked about the impact of art on satisfaction. Did you do any study on the perceived importance of art in the workplace?
No, it was purely satisfaction. I mean, as I said, artwork was one element of what we measured in the research, so it was so vast, it just considered all sorts of aspects of the environment. And realistically, it was how they all work together holistically, so it wasn't trying to separate things out, which is what an awful lot of research does. It tries to look at just the temperature, and you never go into a room and just experience temperature. So it was trying to take a more holistic view, which meant we didn't separate things out, but certainly it's something that we looked at more.
And can we access your research? Is it published, or is there a way we can get a copy of it?
It is. It's online. It's quite long, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
I'll read it.
But it's there is. I'm hoping there'll be a journal paper coming out soon. But I'm happy to send a link through Patrick for the full thesis, and I can highlight pages that are more artwork related if that be useful.
Any other questions? I've got one. Sometimes when I'm pitching for work or talking to potential clients, they have there's a cost element to obviously putting art and refurbishing an office. Is there any? How would you sort of say the cost of the piece could be outweighed by the potential productivity that you're going to get back from it?
Okay. In the sense of direct impact on productivity, it's difficult because 3%, although I was saying it was quite significant and it is statistically significant, it's not very much when you think that's the whole workplace. To separate out one element of it and say the impact of art on productivity is very hard because it will seem quite low, when in reality it's probably not low at all. If you look at it in the sense of the cost of employees, so they usually do a split of it's about 80% cost for your employees, salary costs and organisation, 20% capital, 20% operation level. If you think about investing a tiny bit more per square metre in that 20% of capital, it doesn't actually have to have a huge impact on productivity to give you a payback from your turnover. So I mean, I've got some research from the late 90s as relevant, but their investment of, it was something like they measured a 3% increase and it gave them about, on the average sized office, which is 45,000 square metres in the US, it was about $2 million increase in turnover on their kind of average salary costs. So it just, in terms of the amount of increase in your turnover through productivity, it could outweigh the cost, but it's very difficult to pin it down to exactly how much, including art.
Yes, you say that generally if you change the art every 6 months, is what Patrick does here. Have you looked at any research in changing it every 3 months, so quarterly, and that effects on productivity in terms of how frequently you change the art and how that has a direct correlation?
Not at the moment, and to be honest, in the research we did, we were changing it every day, so that was a very quick turnaround because they were projected images, so it was slightly different. Change in general in terms of the workplace environment tends to have a positive impact in the sense, I'll say, if people are in there a long time, 8 hours a day at least in most offices, and you tend, if you sat at your desk and you're looking at the same wall, you're going to see the same thing. And people just stop, in fact, people just stop noticing it. And that's the worst thing, is they either start to dislike it, which is very rare if they liked it to start with, or they just don't see it anymore. So, if you can change it, the change will always prompt. They say change is rest. It's that kind of theory of if you keep changing it, it will have an impact. But again, we're talking about ownership and choice. If you give people an element of choice, then you're then adding in that extra benefit of giving them ownership over the space, so you can change it and have the benefit of choice. That gives you sort of a double impact.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you very much again, Jenny, for coming and telling us all about the research. Die, change them. And there's food and more drink outside.